The lawyer slid the folder across the polished mahogany, and my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't the sheer number of zeros on the page that made my breath catch. It was the date listed at the top, 2008. The year my parents told me Grandpa Thomas left me nothing but his old gold-plated watch. They'd smiled with such practiced pity, telling me he wasn't a wealthy man, that his love was the real inheritance he'd wanted me to have. For 15 long years, I believed them without question. I'd worn that watch every single day, a tangible symbol of his humble, unwavering affection. But this folder, this single damning piece of paper, told a completely different story. It screamed a truth so loud it was deafening. My parents weren't just liars, they were thieves. And that watch, it was never a symbol of love. It was a gag, a beautifully crafted distraction to keep me silent and ignorant. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. As I reach for the document, the thick paper cool against my fingertips. It was a summary of disbursements from my grandfather's estate, a name I hadn't seen in print in over a decade. Elena Vance, beneficiary. The amount was staggering, enough to have changed the entire trajectory of my life, enough to have paid for my college education outright, to have saved me from years of ramen noodle dinners and soul-crushing student loan debt. Enough to have bought the small house I dreamed of, instead of renting a cramped apartment with a leaky faucet. The lawyer, a kind-faced man named Mr. Albright, who had taken over his father's practice, watched me with gentle eyes. He'd found the discrepancy while digitizing old client files. A trust, established in my name, that was supposed to be transferred to my legal guardians, my parents, to be held for me, until my 25th birthday. A birthday that had come and gone 8 years ago. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Every memory of the past 15 years began to recontextualize itself, shifting and twisting into grotesque new shapes. Their constant, subtle criticisms of my financial choices, their sighs of disappointment when I had to ask for a small loan to cover a car repair, their smug lectures on the importance of living within one's means. All of it, every single word, was a lie. It was a performance designed to keep me down, to make me feel small and incapable, so I would never think to question the narrative they had so carefully constructed. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my confidence, my security, and my perception of my own history. They had painted themselves as my long-suffering providers, while they were secretly living off my legacy. The weight of their deception was suffocating, a physical pressure in my chest. I finally understood. Their condescension wasn't born of concern. It was born of guilt, a defense mechanism to justify their profound betrayal. I looked up at Mr. Albright, my vision blurred with unshed tears. "What do I do now?" I whispered, the words barely audible. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "Now," he said, his voice firm, "we get it back." And in that moment, the raw, searing pain began to morph into something else, something cold and hard and sharp. It was the birth of a righteous fury, a quiet resolve that settled deep in my bones. They had underestimated me my entire life. They were about to learn how grave a mistake that was. The drive home from the lawyer's office was a blur. I clutched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, the city lights smearing past my window like watercolor on a wet page. My mind was a chaotic storm of memories, each one now tainted by the ugly truth. I remembered being 19, a sophomore in college, my part-time job at the campus library barely covering my textbooks. I had called them in tears, overwhelmed by the cost of a required science course. My father's voice had been laced with that familiar, weary disappointment. "Elena, you need to learn to budget better. We're not made of money, you know. We're doing our best to help you, but you have to be more responsible." I could almost hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass in the background, the murmur of the television. I had hung up the phone, feeling ashamed and incompetent, convinced I was a financial burden. Now, the memory made my stomach churn. They weren't struggling. They were sitting on a fortune that was rightfully mine, sipping expensive cocktails and judging my desperation. They had received the first disbursement from my grandfather's trust that very year. They were, in fact, quite literally made of my money. The hypocrisy was so staggering. It was almost comical. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, the double shifts I had worked, the social events I had missed, the constant, gnawing anxiety about bills. I had prided myself on my resilience, on my ability to make it on my own. But it was all a lie. I wasn't on my own. I was unknowingly subsidizing their comfortable, carefree lifestyle. Their new car every few years, the kitchen renovation with the imported Italian marble, their annual 2-week vacations to Europe. They had always explained it away with vague references to smart investments and my father's unexpected bonus. They had made it seem like they were just savvy, middle-class people who knew how to manage their finances. The truth was, their primary investment was in my ignorance. Their biggest bonus was my stolen inheritance. The anger was a living thing inside me now, coiling and uncoiling in my gut. It was a clean, purifying fire, burning away the years of self-doubt they had so carefully instilled in me. They had called me naive. They had called me irresponsible. They had treated me like a child who couldn't be trusted with her own life. They had no idea who I was about to become. My first call was to Chloe. She was my rock, the one person in my life who had never once made me feel small. We had been friends since kindergarten. Our bond forged over a shared love of swings and a mutual dislike of playground bullies. She was a paralegal now, sharp and methodical, with a fierce sense of justice that had only been honed by her profession. I found myself parked outside her apartment, unable to bring myself to go to my own empty place. I called her from the car, my voice cracking as I tried to explain the situation. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. She just listened, a steady, calming presence on the other end of the line. When I finally finished, my story punctuated by ragged breaths and choked sobs, there was a long pause. "Chloe?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Are you there?" Her voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. "Elena," she said slowly, "I want you to take a deep breath. Then I want you to come upstairs. We are going to dismantle them." Brick by brick. I let out a shuddering sigh of relief, the tension in my shoulders easing for the first time all day. I wasn't alone in this. I had an ally, an emotional anchor in the storm of my life. I went upstairs, and Chloe enveloped me in a hug that felt like coming home. She sat me down at her kitchen table, poured me a glass of wine, and took the folder from my trembling hands. She read through the documents with a focused intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is airtight," she said finally, looking up at me. "The trust was explicitly for you. They had a fiduciary duty to manage it in your best interest and turn it over to you on your 25th birthday. They didn't just break your trust, Elena. They broke the law." Her words were a balm to my wounded soul. It wasn't just a family dispute. It was a crime. I wasn't just a hurt daughter. I was a victim. That distinction was crucial. It gave me the distance I needed to see the situation clearly, to separate my emotions from the facts. Chloe started making a list on a yellow legal pad, her handwriting neat and precise. "First, we need a full accounting. We need to know exactly how much they took and where it went. Mr. Albright can help with that. We need to subpoena their bank records, their credit card statements, everything." She looked at me, her eyes flashing with a protective fire. "Are you ready for this? It's going to get ugly." I thought of my parents' smug, pitying faces, of the years of quiet manipulation. I thought of the life I could have had, the opportunities that had been stolen from me. I took a sip of wine, the liquid courage spreading through my veins. "Let them bring the ugly," I said, my voice steady. "I've been living in it for 15 years. It's time they got a taste of it themselves." The days that followed were a strange mix of numb disbelief and focused action. With Chloe's guidance, I became a detective in my own life story. Mr. Albright filed the necessary legal motions, and soon the floodgates opened. 15 years of my parents' financial history began to pour in, and with each new document, the picture of their betrayal became clearer and more grotesque. It was worse than I could have imagined. They had started spending the money almost immediately. The first major purchase was a luxury sedan, just 3 months after my grandfather's death. I remembered that car. My father had claimed he got an incredible deal on a slightly used floor model. He had patted the hood with a proud grin, telling me, "See, Elena, it's all about patience and finding the right opportunity." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Their opportunity was my inheritance. The bank statements read like a chronicle of a life I was never meant to see. There were charges from 5-star hotels in Paris and Rome, receipts from designer boutiques on Fifth Avenue, and withdrawals from ATMs in exotic locations I could only dream of visiting. They had funded a life of luxury on my dime, all while preaching to me about the virtues of frugality. One charge, in particular, stood out to me. It was from a high-end jewelry store, dated the week of my 21st birthday. The amount was just over $5,000. I remembered my 21st birthday vividly. My parents had taken me out to a modest dinner at a local chain restaurant. They had given me a $100 bill and a card with a schmaltzy pre-written message. "We're so proud of the responsible young woman you've become," my mother had said, squeezing my hand. "We wish we could do more, but things are a little tight right now." A few weeks later, she had shown up to a family gathering wearing a stunning new diamond necklace. When my aunt admired it, my mother had laughed and said, "Oh, this old thing. Your uncle is just too good to me." It wasn't my uncle, it was my grandfather, and it wasn't a gift to her. It was a theft from me. Chloe and I sat at her kitchen table for hours, surrounded by stacks of paper, a highlighter in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. We created a timeline, a detailed spreadsheet that cross-referenced their spending with the lies they had told me. It was a monument to their deceit, a testament to their greed. With every entry, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just about the money. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about taking back the power they had held over me for so long. They had written the story of my life for the past 15 years. Now, it was my turn to write the ending. The hardest part was pretending. I had to maintain the illusion of the dutiful, slightly clueless daughter, while a storm of rage and betrayal brewed inside me. I had to answer my mother's weekly phone calls, listen to her mundane complaints about the rising price of groceries, and feign interest in her garden club gossip. Each conversation was a masterclass in self-control. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. "How dare you talk to me about the price of lettuce when you spent my inheritance on a first-class ticket to Hawaii?" I had to force a smile into my voice when every instinct told me to unleash the torrent of accusations that were constantly swirling in my mind. The old Elena would have confronted them immediately, armed with righteous indignation and a desperate need for answers. She would have cried and yelled, and they would have twisted her emotions against her, calling her hysterical and ungrateful. They would have gaslighted her into oblivion, and she would have ended up apologizing to them. But I wasn't the old Elena anymore. The new Elena was patient. She was strategic. She was collecting her ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My ally in this charade was Chloe, my emotional anchor and strategic partner. We had a code. A text from me with a simple "thinking of you" meant I had just survived another phone call with my mother. "How's your day?" meant I needed a reminder of the end goal, a quick pep talk to keep my resolve from wavering. Chloe was brilliant. She helped me rehearse my lines, practice my tone. "Remember," she would say, "you are a calm, loving daughter who is slightly concerned about their recent extravagance. You are not an avenging angel. Not yet." So I played my part. I called my father on his birthday and wished him well, my voice dripping with a sweetness that was pure acid in my mouth. I sent my mother a bouquet of flowers on her anniversary, the cost of which felt like a bitter joke. I was the patient genius, the underestimated daughter, enduring the injustice silently, biding my time. And with each passing day, their arrogance grew. They were so confident in their deception, so secure in their belief that I was blind to their manipulations. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully laid trap. Their overconfidence would be their downfall, and I would be the one to spring it. The enablers were a special kind of poison. My extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, had always been a fixture in my life. We had celebrated holidays together, attended weddings and funerals, and created a tapestry of shared memories. Or so I thought. As I delved deeper into the past, I began to see the threads of their complicity. They were the background cowards, the silent witnesses who had chosen willful ignorance over uncomfortable truths. They must have seen the signs. The sudden, inexplicable jump in my parents' standard of living. The designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the complete renovation of their home. These were not the markers of a middle-class couple nearing retirement. They were the spoils of a secret windfall. Did they ever ask where the money came from? Did they ever wonder how my parents could afford such a lavish lifestyle while I was struggling to make ends meet? Or did they simply accept the vague explanations and enjoy the reflected glow of my parents' newfound wealth? I remembered a Christmas, about 10 years ago. I was in my early 20s, working a dead-end retail job and living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. I had scraped together enough money to buy my parents a decent bottle of wine. They had unwrapped it with polite smiles before handing me my gift, a generic gift basket filled with cheap lotions and bath bombs. Later that day, I watched as they gave my uncle a brand new set of expensive golf clubs. "Just a little something to thank you for all your support," my father had said with a magnanimous wave of his hand. At the time, I had felt a familiar pang of inadequacy, a sense that I was somehow falling short of their expectations. Now, I saw the scene for what it was. A performance for the benefit of the enablers, a way to buy their silence, to make them feel included in the prosperity, so they would never question its source. Their silence was a betrayal in itself. It had amplified my isolation, making me feel like I was the only one who didn't understand the rules of the game. They had created a closed circle of denial, and I was on the outside looking in. As I planned my confrontation, I knew they had to be there. They had to witness the truth, to see the masks ripped from my parents' faces. They had been passive bystanders in my story for far too long. It was time for them to play a role in the final act, whether they wanted to or not. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. They were planning a huge party, a catered affair at a fancy country club, a testament to their enduring love and, I now knew, their enduring greed. It was the ultimate display of their arrogance, a celebration funded by my stolen legacy. They invited everyone, family, friends, neighbours. It was as if they were daring the world to question their success. My mother called me, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Elena, darling, you have to be there. It's going to be the party of the year, and I want you to give a toast. Something sweet, about what our love has taught you." The request was so audacious, so dripping with dramatic irony, that I almost laughed out loud. Oh, I would give a toast. All right. But it wouldn't be the one she was expecting. This was it. The stage was set. The audience was gathered. This was my smoking gun reveal, my moment to turn the tables. I told her I would be honoured to give a toast, my voice filled with a carefully rehearsed sincerity. She was delighted. "Wonderful. I knew we could count on you, sweetie. You've always been such a good daughter." The words, once a source of comfort, now felt like a brand on my skin. I spent the next few weeks preparing, not just my speech, but myself. Chloe and I role-played the confrontation countless times. She played my mother, her voice a perfect imitation of that cloying, condescending tone. She played my father, blustering and dismissive. She played the shocked and horrified guests. We went through every possible scenario, every potential denial, every desperate plea. I learned to control my breathing, to keep my voice steady, to meet their eyes without flinching. I was no longer the hesitant, emotional girl they thought they knew. I was a woman on a mission, fueled by a cold, clear purpose. I had the truth on my side, and I had a folder full of evidence to back it up. The party was in 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the performance of a lifetime. 2 weeks until justice was served. I was ready. The night of the party, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and betrayal were still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but they were tempered by a steely resolve. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant black dress. I wanted to look poised and serious, not flashy or vengeful. I was not there to cause a scene. I was there to correct a record. I wore my grandfather's watch, its familiar weight on my wrist, a constant reminder of the original lie. As I drove to the country club, I went over the plan one last time. Chloe would not be there. This was something I had to do on my own, but she had armed me for battle. In my purse, I had a single, crisp envelope. Inside was a copy of the trust document and a one-page summary of the forensic accounting report, detailing the total amount stolen and a list of the most egregious expenditures. It was my smoking gun, my irrefutable proof. I arrived to find the party in full swing. The room was filled with laughter and music, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the low murmur of polite conversation. My parents were at the centre of it all, glowing with self-satisfaction. My mother, draped in a new silk gown and the infamous diamond necklace, greeted me with a theatrical air kiss. "Elena, you look lovely, but a little sombre perhaps. You must be nervous about your speech." She patted my cheek, her touch sending a jolt of revulsion through me. My father wrapped me in a brief, awkward hug, smelling of expensive cologne and whiskey. "There's my girl," he said, his voice booming. "Ready to tell everyone how wonderful we are?" He winked, and I felt a surge of icy calm. Their condescension was a shield, and I was about to shatter it. I spent the next hour mingling, playing the part of the devoted daughter. I smiled at my aunts and uncles, the enablers, the background cowards. I accepted their compliments on my dress, their questions about my job, their complete and utter obliviousness to the drama that was about to unfold. They were all characters in a play, and they didn't even know it. Finally, the moment arrived. The band leader announced that there would be a special toast from the happy couple's daughter, Elena. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. My mother gave me a proud, expectant smile. My father raised his glass in a mock salute. I walked to the small stage, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat. I took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Elena, Richard, and Susan's daughter. My mother asked me to say a few words tonight about what their 30 years of marriage has taught me. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. What have I learned from my parents? I've learned about the importance of family. I've learned about commitment. And, most significantly, I've learned about the value of a secret. I paused, letting the last word hang in the air. A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. My mother's smile faltered slightly. My father's brow furrowed in confusion. I had their attention. "You see," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room before landing on my parents. "My parents are masters of secrecy. They have a talent for it. For 15 years, they kept a very big secret from me. A secret that started with the death of my grandfather, Thomas Vance." I saw a flicker of panic in my mother's eyes. My father's face darkened. The enablers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "My grandfather was a wonderful man," I said, my voice softening with genuine emotion. "And when he died, my parents told me he had left me nothing but his old watch." I held up my wrist, the gold plating catching the light. They told me his love was my real inheritance. And I believed them. I cherished this watch. But it turns out, my grandfather's love was a little more tangible than they led me to believe. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. He left me a trust fund. A very generous one, in fact. He left me a future they stole. The gasp from the crowd was audible. My mother's face had gone ashen. My father looked like he was going to be sick. I walked off the stage and approached their table, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I placed the envelope in front of my father. "This is a copy of the trust document," I said, my voice low and clear, for only them to hear. "And this is a summary of how you spent my future. The cars, the vacations, the jewellery. It's all there." My mother started to speak, her voice a desperate whisper. "Elena, this is a misunderstanding. We can explain." I looked at her, at the woman who had lied to my face for half my life, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. "No," I said, my voice rising again so the whole room could hear. "You can't. You're going to explain it to my lawyer, and then you're going to explain it to a judge." The aftermath was chaos. My father, his face a mottled shade of red and purple, lunged to his feet, knocking over a glass of champagne. "How dare you?" he sputtered, his voice a mixture of rage and panic. "How dare you air our private family matters in public?" The irony of his words was not lost on me. "Our private family matters," I repeated, my voice dripping with scorn. "You mean your private family crime, the one you committed against me? I think I have a right to make it public." My mother burst into tears, a theatrical display of wounded motherhood. "Elena, please," she sobbed, reaching for my hand. "We did it for you. We were protecting you. You were so young, so irresponsible with money. We were just managing it for you until you were ready." The lie was so audacious, so insulting, that I had to laugh. It was a cold, bitter sound that cut through the silence of the room. "Ready?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You mean ready to discover that you had spent every last cent? I was 25 years old 8 years ago. The money was legally mine then. Where was it, Mom? Was it in the marble for your new kitchen? Or was it on your back, in the form of that diamond necklace?" I gestured to the glittering jewels at her throat, and she shrank back as if I had struck her. The guests were frozen, a tableau of shock and morbid curiosity. The enablers, my dear aunts and uncles, looked at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. Their cowardice was palpable. They had been happy to enjoy the fruits of my parents' theft, but they wanted no part in the reckoning. My father, seeing that his blustering anger was failing, switched tactics. He tried to physically pull me away from the table, to drag me out of the room and silence me. "That's enough," he hissed, his fingers digging into my arm. "You're making a scene." I stood my ground, yanking my arm free from his grasp. "No," I said, my voice ringing with newfound authority. "You're the one who made a scene. You made a scene when you stole from your own daughter. You made a scene when you lied to her for 15 years. This isn't a scene. This is a consequence." I turned my back on them, on their pathetic, crumbling facade, and walked out of the room, leaving a trail of shattered illusions in my wake. The party was over. In the weeks that followed, my parents tried everything. First came the phone calls, dozens of them a day, from both of them, their voices alternating between desperate pleas and angry accusations. I didn't answer. I let them go to voicemail, and Chloe and I would listen to them together, like two generals studying the enemy's propaganda. My mother's messages were tearful and manipulative. "Elena, how could you do this to us? To your own mother? I can't eat, I can't sleep. You've destroyed our family. All for a little bit of money. A little bit of money." The casual dismissal of a life-changing sum was breathtaking. My father's messages were more aggressive. "You have no idea what you're doing, Elena. You're being foolish and rash. You're going to regret this. We have lawyers too, you know. You're not going to win." It was all emotional blackmail, a desperate attempt to regain control. But their power over me was broken. Their words were hollow, meaningless. They were the desperate cries of cornered animals. When the phone calls failed, they moved on to the enablers. They sent my aunts and uncles as their emissaries, hoping to use the guise of family loyalty to sway me. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was the first to try. She called me, her voice oozing with false sympathy. "Elena, honey, I know you're upset, but your parents love you. They made a mistake. That's all. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive them? Think of the family." "A mistake?" I had replied, my voice dangerously calm. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store, Aunt Carol. Embezzling your daughter's inheritance for 15 years is a federal crime. And as for the family, where was the family when I was eating instant noodles for dinner so I could afford my textbooks, while my parents were vacationing in Tuscany? Where was the family then? She had no answer, of course. She just stammered a few more platitudes before hanging up. They had all chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. Their loyalty was not to justice, but to the comfortable status quo. They were just as guilty as my parents, in their own quiet, cowardly way. The final, most pathetic attempt came in the form of a letter from my father. It was a long, rambling screed, full of self-pity and blame. He painted himself as the victim, a loving father who had been unfairly maligned by his ungrateful daughter. He claimed the money was a burden, a temptation that had been too great to resist. He never once used the word sorry. It was the letter of a classic narcissist, incapable of taking responsibility for his own actions. I threw it in the trash without a second thought. They were trying to play the same old game, using the same old tactics. But I was a different player now, and I was writing the rules. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, but it was on my side. Mr. Albright was a master of his craft, calm and methodical, and he guided me through the labyrinth of depositions and discovery with a steady hand. The first major victory came when the judge granted our motion to freeze my parents' assets. They were cut off from their ill-gotten gains, forced to live on my father's modest retirement income. The panicked phone calls started again, this time with a new edge of desperation. "They've frozen our accounts, Elena," my mother had wailed in a voicemail. "We can't even buy groceries. How could you be so cruel?" The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost sublime. They were getting a small taste of the financial anxiety I had lived with for years, and they couldn't handle it for a single day. The depositions were the most surreal experience of my life. I sat in a sterile conference room, listening as my parents, under oath, tried to justify their actions. They contradicted each other, they lied, they obfuscated. My mother claimed she had no idea about the trust, that my father had handled all the finances. My father claimed he was just investing the money for me, that he had always intended to give it back, with interest. Mr. Albright calmly presented them with the evidence of their lavish spending, the receipts from designer stores, the first-class airline tickets. Were these investments for Elena's future, Mr. Referee Save? "Vance?" he had asked, his voice deceptively mild, as he held up a receipt for a $5,000 handbag. My father's face had turned a familiar shade of purple. He had no answer. I watched them, not with anger, but with a strange sense of detachment. They were no longer the towering figures of my childhood, the arbiters of my self-worth. They were just two small, greedy people, stripped of their power and their dignity, squirming under the harsh light of the truth. They had built their lives on a foundation of lies, and now it was all crumbling around them, and I was the one who had kicked out the first stone. The process was draining, but it was also empowering. With each legal victory, I felt a piece of myself being restored. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was winning. While the legal battle raged on, I began the process of rebuilding my own life. It was a strange and wonderful feeling to be free from the constant weight of their judgment and manipulation. I started by selling the watch. I took it to a reputable jeweler, who confirmed that it was, as I had suspected, a cheap, gold-plated fake. It was worth less than $50. I laughed when he told me. It was the perfect metaphor for their love, a shiny, worthless imitation of the real thing. I sold it for cash, and used the money to buy a beautiful, handcrafted, leather-bound journal and a very expensive pen. It was a symbolic act, a declaration that I was now the author of my own story. I started going to therapy, something I had never been able to afford before. My therapist, a kind and insightful woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, helped me unpack the years of emotional abuse and gaslighting. She helped me see that my parents' betrayal was not a reflection of my worth, but of their own profound brokenness. They tried to keep you small so they could feel big, she told me in one of our sessions. Your strength, your resilience, your independence. It terrified them, because it meant you didn't need them. And if you didn't need them, you might discover their secret. Her words were a revelation. I had always thought their condescension was a sign of my failure. Now, I saw it as a sign of my power. I started reconnecting with my passions, The things I had given up because I was too busy working or too worried about money. I took a pottery class, my hands covered in clay, moulding something new and beautiful out of a formless lump. I joined a hiking club, exploring the mountains and breathing in the clean, fresh air. I was rediscovering the person I was before they had tried to erase her. It was a slow, quiet process, but with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident, more me. I was healing, not just from the theft of my inheritance, but from the theft of my identity. The turning point in the legal case came from an unexpected source. Mr. Albright, in his meticulous review of my parents' bank records, discovered a series of large, regular payments to a financial advisor I had never heard of. The name was unfamiliar, but the amounts were significant. He subpoenaed the advisor's records, and what we found was the final, damning piece of the puzzle. My parents hadn't just spent my inheritance. They had invested a portion of it, under their own names, in a high-risk, high-yield portfolio. It was a desperate gamble, an attempt to grow the money so they could continue their lavish lifestyle indefinitely. And for a while, it had worked. The portfolio had grown significantly. But then, the market had turned, and they had lost a substantial amount. The records showed a series of panicked emails between my father and the advisor, my father demanding to know why the sure thing had gone south. It was the ultimate proof of their intent. They had never planned to give me the money. They had treated it as their own personal slush fund, to be gambled with and squandered as they saw fit. This was the smoking gun that destroyed their defense. Their claim of managing the money for me was blown out of the water. You don't manage a beneficiary's money by putting it in a high-risk fund without their knowledge or consent. You don't invest it in your own name. It was fraud, pure and simple. When Mr. Albright presented this evidence in the final pre-trial hearing, the mood in the room shifted. My parents' lawyer, a slick, overconfident man who had been treating the case as a minor family squabble, suddenly looked pale. My father, who had maintained a blustering, indignant facade throughout the proceedings, finally broke. He slumped in his chair, a defeated man, the fight gone from his eyes. My mother just stared into space, her face a blank mask of despair. They were trapped. There were no more lies to tell, no more excuses to make. The truth had finally caught up with them, and it was relentless. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, looked at them over the top of her glasses, her expression one of utter contempt. "I suggest you consider a settlement," she said, her voice like gravel. "Because if this goes to trial, it's not going to end well for you." The settlement negotiations were swift and brutal. My parents, faced with the overwhelming evidence against them and the prospect of criminal charges, had no choice but to capitulate. They had to sell their house, the one with the imported Italian marble kitchen, the one that had been renovated with my money. They had to sell their luxury cars, their designer clothes, their jewellery. Everything they had accumulated over the past 15 years of deceit had to be liquidated to pay me back. The final amount was staggering. It was the original inheritance, plus interest, plus damages. It was a sum of money that would change my life forever. But as I sat in Mr. Albright's office, watching him go over the final settlement documents, I didn't feel the elation I had expected. I just felt a quiet sense of closure. The money was important, yes. It was a tangible symbol of my victory, a tool that would give me the freedom and security I had been denied for so long. But it wasn't the real prize. The real prize was the truth. The real prize was my own liberation. The day the settlement was finalized, I did something I had been dreaming of for months. I went to a high-end real estate office, the kind of place I would have never dared to enter before. I met with a kind professional agent, and I told her exactly what I was looking for. A small, charming house with a garden, in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. A place of my own, a sanctuary. A few weeks later, I found it. It was a beautiful little cottage, with a stone fireplace and a big, sunny kitchen. It had a small, overgrown garden in the back, full of potential. The moment I walked in, I knew it was home. I made an offer that day, a full cash offer, without a moment's hesitation. The feeling of signing those papers, of knowing that this beautiful little house was mine, all mine, was indescribable. It was a feeling of security, of permanence, of finally being in control of my own destiny. I had spent so many years feeling like a guest in my own life, a temporary resident in a world that belonged to others. Now, I had a place to put down roots, a place to grow. Moving into my new house was a cathartic experience. I spent the first few weeks painting the walls, planting flowers in the garden, and slowly, deliberately, filling the space with things that I loved. There was no judgment, no condescension, no one to tell me that my taste was too expensive, or my choices were impractical. It was just me, creating a home that was a true reflection of myself. One afternoon, as I was unpacking a box of old books, I came across a photo album from my childhood. I sat on the floor of my new living room, the sun streaming through the windows, and I flipped through the pages. There were pictures of me as a little girl, smiling gap-toothed on a swing set, of family vacations to the beach, of birthdays and holidays. In every picture, my parents were there, smiling, looking like the perfect, loving family. For a moment, a wave of sadness washed over me. I mourned the family I thought I had, the parents I thought I knew. I mourned the loss of that innocent, trusting little girl in the photographs. But then, I looked around my beautiful new home, at the life I was building for myself, and the sadness was replaced by a sense of profound gratitude. Gratitude for my own strength, for my resilience, for my refusal to stay broken. Gratitude for Chloe, my unwavering ally. Gratitude for Mr. Albright, my champion of justice. And, in a strange way, gratitude for my parents. Their betrayal had been a crucible, a trial by fire that had forged me into the woman I was today. It had taught me to be strong, to be independent, to trust my own instincts. It had been a painful, brutal lesson, but it was one that had ultimately set me free. I closed the photo album and put it away. It was a part of my history, but it was not my future. My future was here, in this house, in this life that I was creating for myself. And it was bright. A few months after I moved in, I got a letter. It was from my mother. I recognized her looping, overly dramatic handwriting immediately. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. My heart braced for another round of manipulation and guilt, but the letter was different. It was short, just a few lines on a piece of cheap stationery. Elena, it read, I am sorry. I know those words are not enough, but they are all I have. I hope one day you can find peace. There was no justification, no excuse, no attempt to minimize what she had done. It was the first time she had ever offered anything that resembled a genuine apology. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it a real moment of remorse? Or was it just another tactic, a last-ditch effort to get back into my life? I showed the letter to Chloe. She read it, her expression unreadable. What do you think? I asked her. She handed it back to me. I think it doesn't matter if she's sincere or not, she said wisely. What matters is what you do with it. Her apology is for her. Your forgiveness, if you choose to give it, is for you. I thought about her words for a long time. Did I forgive them? I didn't know. The wound was still there, a deep, jagged scar on my heart. But the anger, the burning rage, had faded. It had been replaced by a kind of weary sadness, a sense of pity for two people who had lost their moral compass so completely. I decided not to respond to the letter. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a single act. It was a process, and it was a process that had to happen on my own terms, in my own time. I was no longer interested in their drama, in their attempts at reconciliation. I was interested in my own peace. And my peace was found in the quiet solitude of my garden, in the warmth of my fireplace, in the laughter of my friends. My peace was found in the life I had built, a life that was free from their influence. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. One of the most surprising and wonderful things that came out of my ordeal was a renewed connection with my grandfather's memory. For 15 years, my image of him had been filtered through the lens of my parents' lies. He was the kind but poor old man who had left me nothing but a cheap watch. Now, I had the chance to get to know the real him. Mr. Albright, who had known my grandfather for years, shared stories with me. He told me about my grandfather's sharp wit, his love of travel, his shrewd business sense. He showed me old photographs of him, a handsome, smiling man with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. He was not the humble, simple man my parents had described. He was a vibrant, successful, and incredibly generous person. He had loved me so much that he had left me a fortune, a gift that was meant to secure my future. My parents had not only stolen my money, they had stolen my grandfather from me. They had replaced the memory of a dynamic, loving man with a pathetic, one-dimensional caricature. Reclaiming my inheritance was also about reclaiming him. I framed one of his old photographs and put it on my mantelpiece, next to a vase of fresh flowers. I wanted to see his face every day, to be reminded of his love and his legacy. I started a small, private foundation in his name, using a portion of the settlement money to provide scholarships for underprivileged students. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to honor his generosity and to turn my painful experience into something positive. It was a way of saying thank you, not just for the money, but for his faith in me. He had believed in me enough to entrust me with his legacy, and now I was finally living up to that belief. A year after the settlement, I ran into my father. It was a random, bizarre encounter in the produce aisle of a grocery store in a neighboring town. He looked small. The blustering, arrogant man I had known my whole life was gone. In his place was a stooped, grey-haired old man, his clothes slightly shabby, his eyes dull and lifeless. He was holding a can of generic brand corn, staring at it as if it held the secrets of the universe. He didn't see me at first. I could have just walked away, avoided the awkwardness, the painful memories. But something made me stop. I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see if there was any remorse, any flicker of the man he used to be. I walked up to him and said, "Hello, Dad." He looked up, and for a moment, his eyes were blank with confusion. Then, recognition dawned, followed by a wave of shame and fear. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. "Elena," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I live nearby," I said simply. "I'm shopping for groceries." We stood there for a long, awkward moment, the silence punctuated by the cheerful beeping of a nearby cash register. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept staring at the can of corn in his hand. I hear you bought a house," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "It's very nice. I have a garden." He nodded, a jerky, bird-like movement. "That's good," he said. "That's good." And that was it. There was no apology, no attempt at reconciliation, just a sad, pathetic old man, haunted by his own greed. I looked at him, at the wreckage of a life he had destroyed, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even sadness, just nothing. He was a stranger to me now, a ghost from a past I had left behind. I said, "Well, I should go. It was seeing you." I didn't wait for a reply. I just turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the brightly lit aisle with his can of corn and his regrets. Today, my life is full. It's not a life of extravagant luxury, but one of quiet, joyful abundance. I have a home that I love, a job that I find fulfilling, and a circle of friends who are my true family. I have my garden, my pottery, my hikes in the mountains. I have my peace. Sometimes, I think about my parents, and I wonder what their lives are like now. I imagine them in a small, rented apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of their former glory, their days filled with bitterness and regret. I don't hate them. I don't wish them ill. I just don't think about them very much at all. They have no power over me anymore. They are just a chapter in my story, a dark and painful chapter, but one that is now closed. The real story, my story, is the one I am writing every day. It's a story of resilience, of empowerment, of reclaiming one's own narrative. It's a story of turning pain into purpose, of finding light in the darkest of places. And it's a story that is far from over. I still have the journal I bought with the money from the fake watch. It's almost full now. Its pages filled with my thoughts, my dreams, my plans for the future. It's a testament to how far I've come, a record of my journey from a victim to a victor. And as I sit here in my sunny kitchen, a cup of coffee in my hand, the scent of flowers drifting in from the garden, I feel a sense of profound and lasting peace. I am home. I am whole. I am free. And that is an inheritance that no one can ever take away from me.